We've all seen brutal ways to die, but these house parties that turned into death traps, they're absolutely disturbing. From a man who squeezed onto a corroded balcony railing to a guy who walked straight toward a pool so dark it swallowed him whole and spat him out in a body bag. It was October 8th, 2022, inside a converted textile warehouse in Manchester, England. It was a night that should have ended with a train ride home, but the building had been hiding its true condition for decades, waiting for just the right amount of weight. Nico Harju was 29 years old, a warehouse logistics coordinator from Finland, visiting friends for the weekend. He was quiet by most accounts, someone who rarely went to parties and usually left early when he did. He kept a modest photography habit, mostly landscapes. Taken during long walks, he preferred overcrowded rooms. Friends said he came that weekend more out of obligation than enthusiasm, planning to catch an early train back the next morning. The loft occupied the second floor with a balcony overlooking the dance floor below. Sometime after midnight, someone suggested recreating an old college photo. 8 people stepped onto the balcony, laughing and gathering near the railing as they focused on the picture instead of the structure beneath them. Nico joined them. You'd probably do the exact same thing without giving that railing a second thought. There was no reason for anyone on that balcony to suspect the railing. It looked solid and freshly painted, but decades of hidden corrosions beneath cosmetic repairs had weakened the steel connections holding it in place. Classic cover-up job. I've seen this play out in every renovated nightmare building, and it makes my blood boil. As the group leaned back together, settling into position for the shot, the railing gave way in an instant. There was no slow bending, no warning creak that anyone downstairs remembered hearing before the sound came. Witnesses on the dance floor below described a sharp metallic snap, followed almost immediately by the sound of bodies hitting concrete. 6 guests fell nearly 20 feet. The detached railing itself came down separately, landing directly on another guest who had been standing underneath, watching the group above. People near the dance floor said the fall did not look real at first, that there was a strange delay before anyone screamed, as though the room needed a second to understand what it had just watched. Then, everyone was moving at once. Guests dropped drinks and phones and ran toward a pile of bodies on the concrete. Nico had struck the floor with his head taking the worst of the impact. He did not regain consciousness. Those closest to him said he never showed any sign of responding before paramedics reached his side. Felix Wald, 33, the guest standing beneath the balcony when the railing fell, survived the initial collapse but had taken the impact directly across his chest. He was transported to a hospital and also died the following afternoon. 2 lives, one because of a fall, the other because of a falling railing. Talk about a double gut punch. A later coroner's report ruled Nico's death was caused by blunt force head trauma from the fall, while Felix died from fatal blunt force chest injuries after being struck by the collapsing railing. Engineers later found the same hidden corrosion beneath several other freshly painted railings, and the building owner was later prosecuted over the neglected structural defects uncovered by the investigation. I hate how these kinds of band-aid fixes rarely stay hidden forever. Instead of saving property owners money, they often turn neglected buildings into massive legal, financial, and reputational liabilities. You gotta be ready for more, because we're just getting started. The next scene is slower, quieter, and somehow just as merciless. A fire that cracked for hours before anyone realized it. It was December 20th, 2014, at a community hall on the outskirts of Christchurch, New Zealand, where a string of Christmas lights blinked steadily against a wall outlet that had already given up more warning signs than anyone bothered to notice that night. Betty Solberg was 31 and worked as a veterinary receptionist. At the time, she was dating Owen Al Rufai, 35, a refrigeration technician. Both had come straight from work, and I'm sure you can relate to that kind of exhaustion, where a chat and a drink feel like the only reasonable plan. They ended up in a storage room off the main hallway where they sat down for a break with a few drinks and fell asleep from exhaustion and intoxication before the party outside had even reached its loudest point. Meanwhile, the volunteer DJ kept adding equipment to his setup, overloading an aging electrical outlet with daisy-chained extension strips. I'm looking at that description and my skin's already crawling. That's not a setup. That's a science experiment in arson. Apparently, guests near the outlet noticed the lights flicker more than once over the course of the night. A few mentioned it to each other, decided the building's wiring was just old, and went back to the dance floor. Nobody unplugged anything. That single decision, repeated by several different people in several different moments, is the kind of thing that only looks like negligence after the fact. In the moment, it looked like a party.
And I can't judge them. I've talked myself out of acting on a gut feeling dozens of times, because who wants to be the paranoid buzzkill?
Beneath a pile of paper decorations that had been stacked directly over one of the overloaded power strips, a loose connection inside one of the strips had been heating slowly for hours. Nobody saw it happen because there was nothing to see yet, just heat building quietly against the decorations, resting on top of it that nobody thought to move. The first anyone noticed was a thin haze near the ceiling, mistaken briefly for fog machine drift. Then someone caught the smell of smoke that didn't belong to the machine. By the time a guest pushed through a side door to investigate, flames had already climbed the hanging fabric decorations along the hallway, while thick smoke spread rapidly toward the storage room where Betty and Owen remained asleep. My stomach drops just imagining that delay that fog machine excuse bought seconds that turned into lives lost. Within a minute, visibility in the hallway dropped to almost nothing. Several guests tried to push toward the storage room door and were driven back by heat that one man described as hitting like an open oven door to the face. Two men forced the storage room door open within a few minutes of the smoke being spotted, but the room was already black inside. They called Betty's and Owen's names and heard nothing back. One of them said afterward that he didn't know if it was worse to hear a response or to hear silence. Guests outside called emergency services the moment smoke was visible in the hallway. Fire crews arrived in about 7 minutes, which by most standards is fast, but it wasn't fast enough for the room those two were in. Firefighters found Betty and Owen only a few feet from the doorway. The coroner determined that both died from smoke inhalation before the fire itself reached them, with toxic smoke and carbon monoxide exposure causing them to lose consciousness before the flames reached the room. Toxicology reports also confirmed alcohol in both victim systems, which investigators believed likely contributed to their inability to wake and escape. The investigation traced the fire to an overloaded electrical outlet and a faulty power strip buried beneath paper decorations, which had slowly overheated over several hours before igniting. Authorities ruled the fire accidental and no criminal charges were filed. The community hall was temporarily closed while investigators examined the building and electrical system, and the Christmas party ended in tragedy as guests were evacuated and later gathered to mourn the couple's death. You know what guts me most?
You know what guts me the most? They were found only a few feet from the doorway, so close that if the smoke had been a little thinner, or if someone had opened that door a minute sooner, they'd have walked out.
Now, if Betty and Owen never saw the fire coming, Ryland saw the blade the whole time and walked toward it anyway. It was June 15th, 2013, in a quiet suburban neighborhood outside Boise, Idaho. There, a backyard gathering that had started with laughter and cold drinks was about to end with a garage floor. No amount of scrubbing would ever fully return to normal. Ryland Eastmond was 27 years old and worked as a mechanic at a local tire shop. He had a reputation in his workplace for being warm and quick with a joke. That evening, he had been drinking steadily at the party since early afternoon, cycling between the backyard and the cooler by the garage door, growing louder and less coordinated with each pass. His likely goal that night was to keep the party going, and he treated every mild correction from friends as something to laugh off, rather than absorb a detail we know based on what people who knew him said in the aftermath. The host had stepped into the garage between conversations to finish trimming a few shelving boards before the next day's renovation project. The table saw was running as he fed another board through it, set up on sawhorses near the center of the space, extension cords stretched across the concrete floor toward an outlet by the door. Multiple guests had wandered in and out of that garage over the course of the evening, and more than one person had been told, plainly, to stay clear of the saw while it was on. Ryland wandered in carrying another drink, saying something about helping with the shelves, and a friend near the doorway told him flatly to get out, that the saw was running and he had been drinking too much to be near it. He laughed it off, waved a hand, and kept walking toward the sawhorses anyway. His foot caught the extension cord stretched across the floor.
I don't think he saw it coming, and honestly, in that state, I doubt he would have reacted differently, even if he had.
He went down hard, falling across the edge of the saw table and driving his upper arm directly into the path of the spinning blade. The moment his upper arm made contact, the sound in the garage changed completely. A wet, mechanical grinding that cut through the noise of the party outside. The blade caught the inside of his arm in a single pass, severing the brachial artery. Severe bleeding began immediately, and for a moment, nobody fully understood what had happened. The host lunged for the switch and shut the saw off within seconds before dropping beside him and shouting for someone to call EMS. As two guests pressed towels against the wound, Ryland was still talking at first, confused about what had happened. But within about a minute, he turned pale, his speech becoming fragmented before fading altogether.
By the time he's confused and pale, I'm already thinking this is over, because a brachial artery doesn't give you a second chance.
Ryland lost consciousness within a few minutes of the fall, his breathing shallow and irregular by the time paramedics arrived. They continued resuscitation efforts in the garage and during transport, including hemorrhage control and fluid resuscitation, but the blood loss had already progressed past the point where it could be reversed. He was pronounced dead a short time later at the hospital. Police ruled the death a tragic accident after determining there was no mechanical failure with the table saw. Investigators concluded that alcohol impairment and entering an active work area were the primary factors in the incident. The gathering ended immediately as guests remained behind to speak with investigators, while the host later removed the saw from the garage before completing the renovation under much stricter safety precautions. As a drinker myself, I think it sucks that the beer in his hand wasn't a social lubricant that day. It was a death warrant. And if Ryland never saw the danger coming because he was drunk, our next victim never saw it coming because no one else did either. It was September 2nd, 2017 in Calgary, Canada. What if I told you that the most dangerous thing at a family gathering wasn't the grill, the fireworks, or even the garage door opener, but the very structure everyone trusted without a second thought? Sena Volkov was 34 and worked as an office furniture installer. He'd spent the entire weekend helping a friend move apartments, and this party was meant to be the reward for it. A few hours of sitting still, drinking a beer, and not lifting anything heavier than a paper plate.
I can't help thinking he had absolutely earned a quiet evening, which makes what happened even harder to accept.
The garage door had been left open most of the afternoon, and as the evening cooled, a handful of guests drifted inside it, treating the space like an extension of the driveway. Sena settled onto the concrete floor with his back against the lower panel of the door, a spot that offered shade and a view of the yard. Nobody had inspected that door in months. Little did they know, the mounting points for one of the lower hinges had been slowly pulling free from the door's wooden internal framing, which had rotted after years of moisture exposure, and there was nothing about its appearance that afternoon that suggested it was compromised.
And there it is. The silent killer isn't dramatic, isn't just lazy maintenance. And I guarantee you, your own house has a version of this waiting to happen.
One of the guests, toddlers, found the garage remote on a side table and pressed it twice. As the garage door began closing, years of hidden rot caused one of the lower mounting points to fail with a loud crack, sending the weakened bottom section collapsing outward before anyone could react. Senna must have felt the movement behind him and leaned forward to get out of the way. At that moment, the rotted lower section suddenly gave way with a splintering crack, sending the damaged portion of the door crashing onto his chest and neck, pinning him to the concrete. 3 guests reached him almost simultaneously. 2 of them grabbed the edge of the panel and lifted with their full body weight, managing to raise it only a few inches before their grip gave out on the smooth steel. A 4th guest ran into the house for a crowbar and returned to wedge it beneath the panel, prying upward while 2 others pulled at Senna's arms, trying to slide him free. His breathing had already become shallow and irregular by the time they got any real lift on the door, his chest unable to expand under the sustained weight across it. He stopped responding to his name within roughly a minute of the collapse. I can't imagine the sheer helplessness you're yanking with everything you've got, and it's still not enough. A neighbor who heard the crash called emergency services immediately. Firefighters arrived within 6 minutes and quickly used pry bars and lifting tools to free him, but he was pronounced dead at the scene. The coroner ruled the cause of death as traumatic asphyxiation from chest and neck compression after the door's weight prevented him from breathing long enough to cause cardiac arrest. The investigation found the automatic opener had worked exactly as designed. Instead, the collapse was traced to rotted internal framing and an old hinge repair that had gone unnoticed for months because the door appeared to function normally. I'm telling you right now, I'm checking every single hinge in my house the second I finish this video. Now, the next party didn't need faulty equipment to fail, just immense confidence that he knew better than the packaging in front of him. It was July 4th, 2018, on a rural property outside Springfield, Missouri. Something stood upright in the dirt like a solution to a problem that didn't exist, and within hours, an ambulance would be racing down that gravel drive. Can you guess which piece of the scene was about to become the killer? Ralph James Gibbon was 26 years old, an apprentice electrician still a year out from certification. He had come straight from a job site to the barbecue, still in his work boots, and had spent the better part of the afternoon helping the host set up folding tables and hall coolers. Friends said that he liked being useful, liked being the one people could hand a task to and trust it would get done right.
It's sad knowing being the helpful guy
is exactly what parked him in the wrong spot at the wrong time. The host was setting up a large aerial mortar firework for the family's backyard display when he decided the cardboard launch tube that came with it wasn't sturdy enough. He wanted a cleaner, more vertical launch he could show off to the kids. He had sunk a length of rigid PVC pipe into the lawn earlier that day, packed dirt around its base, and pronounced it a precision launcher. Several people at the barbecue told him directly that this wasn't how the shell was designed to be fired, that PVC didn't fail safely the way the cardboard launch tube was designed to, and that he was asking for trouble. He laughed it off, said he'd done it before, and reached for a lighter. Ralph didn't argue with him. That part matters, I think,
because staying quiet isn't the same as agreeing.
And there's a version of this story where Ralph simply didn't feel it was his place to lecture a host at his own party. He had positioned himself off to the side with a few other guests, close enough to see the show, not so close that he expected any of this to reach him. I hate that Ralph's politeness probably cost him his life. Sometimes being the nice guy just means being the easiest target. The host lit the fuse and stepped back, grinning, waiting for the same show he claimed to have pulled off before. For a few seconds, nothing happened beyond the ordinary hiss of a burning fuse. Then, the mortar ignited before it had fully cleared the pipe. The PVC fractured catastrophically, bursting into jagged fragments, moving outward with the force of a contained explosion that had nowhere else to go. One shard caught Ralph in the upper thigh, driving in deep enough to sever his femoral artery completely. Witnesses said the sound wasn't the firework at all, it was the pipe itself. A flat, violent crack unlike anything from the actual mortar shells fired earlier that night. Blood came fast, in a way that made grown adults freeze for a full second before anyone moved. People scrambled. Someone grabbed towels from a cooler and pressed them against the wound using direct pressure, but the bleeding continued unchecked without an effective tourniquet placed high on the leg. Ralph went pale fast, his breathing shallow, and within minutes he had lost consciousness from blood loss that nobody standing over him could stop with towels and hands alone. I keep thinking, if just one person there had a real tourniquet, or even a belt wrapped high enough, would we be having a different conversation right now? Multiple guests called emergency services at nearly the same moment. Phones out before anyone had fully processed what had happened. He was still alive when they loaded him into the ambulance, but he died at the hospital a short time later. The coroner's report listed the cause of death as exsanguination due to a laceration of the femoral artery. He bled out faster than first aid on scene could counter it. Investigators determined the fatal injury was caused by fragments from the ruptured PVC launch tube, which had been used contrary to the manufacturer's instructions. The barbecue ended immediately as guests assisted investigators, while authorities reminded the public to use only approved launch tubes when handling aerial fireworks. For me, this entire tragedy boils down to one stubborn fool who swapped cardboard for PVC and a 26-year-old kid who paid the price for someone else's ego. So next time you see a hack at a party, speak up. Ralph's fireworks night ended in a spray of shattered plastic and blood on the lawn, but sometimes it's not a mortar that turns deadly, it's a suitcase sitting quietly on a shelf. It was November 29th, 2014, in a modest apartment building in Malmö, Sweden, where a hallway closet nobody thought twice about was quietly holding more weight than its shelf was ever built to carry. Daria Lindgren was 38 years old and worked as a payroll clerk for a logistics company. She had spent the previous weekend helping a friend move apartments, hauling boxes up 3 flights of stairs, and she showed up to the small holiday gathering that night, probably tired but glad to be somewhere warm with people she liked.
She sounds like one of us, just grinding through the week.
And that normalcy is exactly what twists the knife for me. The apartment belonged to a coworker who hosted a small gathering every December. Nothing elaborate, just mulled wine and a dozen people crowded into a living room too small for all of them. Winter coats piled up fast that night, so guests were directed to store their jackets in the hallway closet instead of adding to the mess. Nobody thought about what else might be in there. The host had, months earlier, pushed an old 50-pound suitcase onto the top shelf to clear floor space, and it had sat there since, wedged against nothing, secured by nothing, held up by the same shelf that was now supporting a dozen strangers' coats. 50 pounds unsecured on a flimsy rack is pure negligence, and I'd be livid if I were in that family. Daria went looking for her scarf about an hour into the evening. She opened the closet door and likely found the coats tangled together the way they always are at parties like this. Sleeves knotted around hangers, someone's jacket buried under 3 others. She reached in and pulled on a sleeve that wouldn't give easily.
I think about how many times all of us has yanked on a stuck piece of clothing without a second thought.
Somewhere above, the suitcase that had been sitting undisturbed for months shifted forward as the tightly packed coats tugged against the shelf and gradually pulled its weight toward the edge until it finally tipped free, and it came down, Witnesses in the living room said they heard a heavy, flat thud from the hallway. A guest standing closest to the closet said the suitcase struck Daria across her temple and the side of her head before she had any chance to look up or step back. She went down immediately, straight to the hardwood floor, collapsing instantly from the impact. For a few seconds, nobody moved. Two people thought she had simply fainted, and someone even made a small joke before they got closer. The jokes stopped when guests noticed blood pooling beneath her head. One guest with basic first aid training knelt beside her and called her name several times, but she didn't respond. She was still breathing, but only shallowly, and remained unconscious. She was taken to a regional hospital where doctors determined she had suffered a catastrophic skull fracture and fatal brain injury. She died later that night, just hours after the party. Authorities ruled the incident an accident, and no criminal charges were filed. Daria's family chose not to pursue legal action, instead focusing on raising awareness about the dangers of improperly stored heavy luggage and household items. The real tragedy isn't a falling suitcase, it's that we drift through our days surrounded by tiny, invisible landmines, and we never see the knockout punch coming until we're already bleeding on the floor. A closet shelf proved fatal in Sweden, but our next accident shows that darkness can be just as deadly as gravity. It was August 17, 2013, on the Gold Coast, Australia. A birthday party stretched long past sunset, and a pool with a dark charcoal interior sat unlit in the corner of the yard, waiting the way still water always waits, without announcing anything. Kian Duarte was 24 and worked as an apprentice cabinet maker for a small joinery shop. He rarely went to social gatherings, and this one was an exception, apparently made for a cousin's birthday. He did not drink much, and he was not a swimmer, a fact his family knew and rarely discussed since it had never mattered before. They said he probably planned to stay an hour, maybe two, then head home for an early shift the next morning. Knowing how this ends, it's a somber thought that the little act of duty cost him everything. Sometime after 10, his phone rang. They saw him step away from the crowd near the patio to take the call, drink still in hand, moving toward the quieter side of the yard where the music thinned out. The yard was landscaped with garden beds bordering a stone path that curved around the pool rather than running straight across it. In the dark, with his attention on the call, he likely misjudged the line of the path and walked past its edge instead of along it. The pool had no underwater lighting installed, and the dark interior absorbed much of the limited ambient light, making the pool's edge surprisingly difficult to judge. Nothing about the yard told him otherwise.
Now, it might just be me, but who builds a pool like that?
I'm no safety nut, but that's practically a trap. He stepped directly into the deep end. There was no loud splash, witnesses said later when asked to reconstruct it. Just a soft, contained sound swallowed almost immediately by the music and conversation still going near the house. He could not swim, and nobody at the party noticed. That soft, swallowed sound haunts me. Imagine being that close to 100 people and vanishing without a single yell. The pool sat maybe 30 feet from where most of the guests were gathered, listening to loud music, and the dark finish made even the disturbance on the surface difficult to notice at that distance and in that light. Close to 6 minutes passed before another guest, walking toward the side gate, noticed a faint glow coming from Kian's phone resting on the bottom of the pool near the edge. He looked closer and saw Kian lying motionless beneath the water. He shouted for help and went in after him, pulling him to the shallow end and then up onto the concrete. Two other guests came running. One of them began chest compressions almost immediately, while another called emergency services. CPR was done, but the prolonged submersion had already caused severe oxygen deprivation. Kian was pronounced dead a short time later. The layman version of the coroner's report was simple. drowning. Police treated the death as a tragic accident, and Kian's funeral was held on the Gold Coast a few days later, where family members remembered him as a quiet, dependable young man whose absence turned what had been an ordinary birthday gathering into a loss that everyone present carried long afterward.
I don't think there is a lesson in this one, so tidy as the others.
Sometimes the only failure is a light that was never installed, and a night that offered no reason for anyone to look twice.